As you might remember, NetGuardians did back in September last year, did an excellent webinar already specifically on the Bangladesh case, which was quite new at the time, and described exactly what happened there and how fraud solutions could happen. So I added the link there in the slides, and I would really encourage you to go and listen to that podcast to see exactly what happened there. And so for me, if we look at a bit on a broader scope, what the CSP is and where it comes from, well, I think the first thing is that for me, it's a sign of the times. So basically, the times are changing, and what we thought were secure elements before are not so secure anymore. And you see that, we see that just last week. You see with this huge cyber fraud and ransomware attack that attacked the whole world and infected hundreds of thousands of users. So really, that's something that's changing. I mean, the cyber attacks and cyber security is becoming a huge topic that's touching everybody in every sector. And this actually made something very clear, is that banks were built like citadels. So banks have very, very thick walls to protect them against cyber attacks. But thick walls are very effective to prevent bad guys from getting in. But as you know, and that's the reason why we don't have that many citadels today, is if you have a bad guy that's attacking from inside, well, your thick walls are basically useless. So that's really the citadel model today is something that needs to evolve. Another thing that's important and that comes from history is that SWIFT has been perceived inside of the banks as always a kind of exception from every audit, sweep, and report, for the reason that SWIFT was perceived as inherently secure. So basically, a lot of the audit views inside of banks were just not really considering SWIFT or putting SWIFT out of scope, because SWIFT was perceived as something that was extremely secure. And I want to insist that this is still the case. I mean, when the newspapers speak about SWIFT hacking, I think it's important to emphasize that the SWIFT network has never been breached, and SWIFT security has never been breached. So that's something that's very important to reiterate. However, I think that there is no syndrome of the weakest link, which is the SWIFT connection in the bank is just part of a very broad environment, including the whole banking community. And what we have discovered with these latest hacks is that the weakest link can actually endanger everybody in the network and everybody in the community. So we have really seen that with banks that have, through relatively poor security themselves, have exposed other members of the banking community to risks, even if these other members had actually quite good security in place. So actually, the theory of the weakest link is really applying. And the last one, and which is maybe the slightest one, is that for me the cat is out of the bag now. What I mean by that is it's not really a question of having expert hackers that you need to attack you, because basically what you see nowadays, and actually the latest ransomware attack from last week was a very good example of that, is that you have these toolkits that are pretty much ready-made, and that every hacker with a minimum of sense of how to use these tools can now use. So the fact that you would need to be a SWIFT expert or understand perfectly how SWIFT interface works in order to create a hack is something that's not true anymore. These elements, these parts of programs that can compromise networks, these modules are now existing as ready-made components that can be used in hacking. So that's really a bit for me what is the global environment that led to the CSP. So what is the CSP? And I'm not speaking here again about exactly the checklist of the CSP, but what the CSP is from the spirit point of view. Well, first of all, it is the reaction of SWIFT and the community to the events. And I think that we have to praise SWIFT here for having had a very quick reaction, because only a few weeks later, they came with some very pragmatic measures, and now the CSP is rolling out, and it's rolling out very quickly. So I think that it needs a very quick reaction, and basically that's what happened. What the CSP is going to provide basically is three things. It's a baseline of what is good or reasonable security, a checklist to check that you have implemented this baseline, and a timeline in which the community as a whole needs to implement this baseline. Because if you go back to the, as I said, if you go back to how the view that we had from security before, it's basically if you have a connection between two banks and this goes through SWIFT, and SWIFT is perceived as a very secure environment. Well, then in the last, let's say, 40 years, how the perception of security was of this connection was that Bank A the sending bank was responsible up to the point where the financial transaction was handed over to the SWIFT interface, was responsible to handle their security. Then SWIFT was responsible for the whole part where the message was transmitting between two banks. And then the other bank, the recipient bank, was responsible for what happened when the message arrived. So therefore, that was certainly something that a view that was valid before. But again, as I said, today you have to perceive things as a whole, and you have to have a holistic view of this, which is it's not just Bank A, Bank B, it's not just SWIFT. This is a whole community. And it's even more complex if you zoom a bit into these systems, because when you say bank, a bank, it's not just some monolithic entity, of course, because the SWIFT interface is the actual connection to the SWIFT network. But then there is a myriad of back office systems that exchange files, messages, queues, and they all have security settings. So basically, if you have one of the systems that can be compromised, and usually the compromise comes from a user using the system, that can then in turn compromise other elements in the back office, and that can end up, like in the Bangladesh case, by actually also compromising part of the SWIFT interface. So because part of the SWIFT Alliance applications have been compromised in the case of Bangladesh. So basically, there is a ton of different attack vectors to get to the SWIFT interface and basically generate a rogue payment message, because that's what most of the hackers want at the end. And it's not just at the level of the SWIFT interface, but it can be at the level of any other system. So basically, that's why if you take the top objectives of the CSP, it basically focuses on these different elements, saying, okay, well, first thing is you need to secure your environment, because you have to protect who accesses your system. You have to protect who is be able to connect what applications are able to connect to the SWIFT interface. Then you have to know and limit the access, because the accesses need to be defined very precisely to know exactly who needs to access to what, and how and what access is exactly needed. And this basically means that, and this is something that's a pretty common thing in audit reviews. But as I said, the SWIFT interface used to be out of scope for these, and actually the same things not need to apply. And the first thing is, and then the last thing is, well, if you get to the stage where something is compromised or you have an anomaly, then it's important to detect and respond as soon as possible to that. So basically, these measures have to be put in place also. So basically, if you go one level down from the objectives, well, you see that SWIFT has described it. So you have the link there. So this is very precisely described in the CSP FAQ and the CSP description. It has declined these 3 objectives into 8 principles, which basically say, okay, now if we have these objectives, how are we going to, at the board level, implement them? And then the implementation, technical implementation, the service implementation itself is done by 27 controls. Well, and from these 27 controls, 16 are actually mandatory before the end of the year. So this is basically how it presents the CSP from the high-level objectives to the low-level implementation of every one of these objectives. In terms of timeline, well, again, you have the link there, but what you have to just remember is that is 2 things: is that the final version of the CSP, so for these controls, has been available since April, so it has been available quite recently. SWIFT is, for the moment, working with the community in order to communicate and to better inform the community at the local level on how to progress on the subject. And as I said, it is the weakest link that's important. So actually, the whole community needs to be informed and to progress. There is a self-attestation process where banks have to communicate to the rest of the community that they have indeed been progressing on this, and the limits of such attestation is end of this year. So it's actually a challenging agenda, because it needs to be implemented quite fast.
Okay, now we continue with Adrian. He will talk us about risk assessments and policies. Adrian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the second part. Thank you for allowing me to tell a bit about CSP in a broader perspective. Just looking for the other slides. I think it has been reshuffled a little bit. Would like to cover the following. It's just coming up now. Thank you. If we look at CSP in context of the risk management function, obviously we see 2 things. One of is that if you look back a couple of years ago with the financial crisis, financial services institutions were very much occupied going through and eliminating the leftovers of the crisis, then obviously being more interconnected and collaborative with other institutions. But what you can clearly see also with reference to our conversations which we have with financial services factors is that also internal factors come now into place. So the question is at the end on, is this just another threat for a risk management function which they would have to take off? Because what you clearly see is that the cost pressure within financial services institutions increased significantly, because as you all know, the revenue streams are not increasing as much. The costs to invest into compliance and to respond to regulatory authorities is increasing still, and in parallel you have actually the investments in new technologies. I think particularly also risk management can benefit from these investments, but are more and more under scrutiny with regards to budget costs and so on. So it's at the end finding a path on how do you respond to the challenges which I have internally, obviously also with the availability of people, but also acknowledging that the markets are not like a couple of years ago. And what we clearly see there is that the competition is severe, and that risk management organizations are more under pressure to operate effectively. It's also clear to say that market or credit risk related items got more important in comparison to maybe a couple of years ago, and particularly also regulators are more and more looking into operational risk-related items, so heavily also involved in operational risk item lists, which they have to work through, which actually require then also a collaboration among the different institutions, respectively business areas. If we look into the next page, we'll actually see that we are doing a regular study, obviously talking to risk management functions, and just to give you a bit an insight, we're just on the way to publishing a new one on the basis of 500 interviews across the globe, is that obviously cyber risk has increased a lot. It's that topic with regards to the operational risks. In addition, obviously also worth mentioning that the technology part has increased, understanding on how it could be used in order to effectively manage their risks. But it's pretty clear that the operational items, in addition to responding to regulatory requests from the regulators and authorities, is still a key priority. And I think that's also the reason why we are having this conference call here, this webinar on to underpin the importance of adequate solutions, because what you could see is that many of the institutions are still suffering from application landscapes which have grown organically over the last years, but the development of new tools and technologies are available, and very often knowledge and the expertise is not yet within the institutions, and still they have to respond to all these requests. And I think that makes it difficult, obviously, then to prioritize, to understand on how do I get through the change patches in order to actually respond to all the requests. If we continue then with third page. What do we see with regards to the organizations? Because at the end, you might ask yourself, so what if I have just another regulation, or if I have another threat which I have to take care? We clearly see three areas of activities, of actions. We see risk management functions being more in the driving seat to look and steer and influence, obviously, the behaviors of the organizations, because risks are also with the own staff, obviously then also steering and influencing the policies. It's clear that also processes have to be adapted. Imagine many financial services institutions are changing their functional but also application landscape significantly. There's a strong push towards having more modular, more flexible and simple banking, for example, which obviously requires the financial services institutions, and particularly also banks, to adapt accordingly. And what you clearly see is that the complexity of initiatives across the financial services institution has increased, which obviously also puts the risk management function into another position, also influencing on how the future solution could look like. I think already tackled a little bit is that the new technologies and analytics are more and more accepted and used, so that risk management and the underlying teams want to apply the technologies. Obviously also having cost-effective models, for example, looking into on how the solutions could not only be implemented in high-cost countries, but also in low-cost countries, and then really running them cost-efficiently from countries where they can operate accordingly. That said, I think that gave you a brief overview. I mean, we obviously help our clients front to back, from analyzing the landscapes and the process landscape, and obviously also advising them I think we are in an interesting, but also obviously challenging environment where there's a lot of work ahead. So therefore, I would like to hand over to Joël.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adrian, for this point. And I'm very happy we saw from Pascal, I mean, the landscape of needs in regard of CSP program around the objective, the principle, and the control. From your perspective, Adrian, we see that it's a global mindset to have. It's not just paper-based, it's also tooling or analytics, which is key. That could be a broader approach, not just for CSP, but also from the bank itself. And on my side, I would like then to bridge the last gap in regard of controls. So looking at how then with analytic solution, you can really support the CSP initiative, and even at the broader scale, even the cyber fraud within your bank. So we believe it's a great opportunity around it. And if you look at the control area from the CSP, to start from there, then there are three control areas: alliance products, as Pascal said, then cryptography on the link is still very safe. We see that all the weaknesses are still not there. They are way more on the end user from the bank perspective, so more on the customer infrastructure, where IT security measures, controls, best practices really help, and a lot around user and processes. And that's where we believe that analytics nowadays can really help complement IT security, like security information and even management solution, SIM, that would take care maybe of customer infrastructure, alliance product, log management, and so on. And we see that the next steps, that is also very well documented into the CSP, is related to user and processes, and basically not technical things, but way more behavior around it. If we think about the Bangladesh case, basically a lot of things were related to employee behaviors and not so much around technical activities. So basically, if we look at this control and what approach we provide through a NetGuardian solution, it's really to build behavioral analytics, what we call dynamic behavioral profiling, where from past activities, all SWIFT messages, we do some statistical and trend and behavioral analysis through a big data platform. So it means we capture data from the SWIFT layer, from the financial layer, so looking at amounts, currencies, and so on. We link this data with more technical information, such as operating systems, network, and so on. And then we run some analytics on top of that to discover strange behavior, to raise alerts, to get dashboards, to be able to get a clear view of the risks, cyber fraud risk related to SWIFT in that regard, and to escalate through a case manager potential dangerous cases that were highlighted. So that's basically the analytics approach that comes around the CSP program and in a more broader approach for cyber fraud. I will quickly go through the analytic approach because I think that in this area, since 2-3 years, a lot of innovation came around, mainly due to big data technologies that are now very mature and really support what we call dynamic profiling, where we do some self-learning behavioral analytics by just looking at 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years of transactional data or user activities to discover suspicious transactions. Such a transaction on banking holidays happening from a strange computer within the bank, and from a user that is not usually doing such activities, who's more taking care of the database level usually. So all this is self-learning through behavioral analytics, and I think that's a great innovation to use for this type of control that CSP is asking. That is great, but it's not enough. We believe at NetGuardians that rule-based control are still very, very relevant. Because, for instance, if you think at the Bangladesh case, for instance, some beneficiary were not a bank, it was a physical person. So some control around the correspondent bank and so on can still be done through some rules, which are very relevant, but it's not enough. A mix of both approach is really key. And that is what we are calling the two-stage analytics, where we bring these two types of very different control, I would say the new school control and more the standard school control around pattern-based intelligence together to really flag strange behavior and to enforce your control landscape around SWIFT and around cyber risks and cyber fraud within the bank by bridging self-learning behavioral controls based on past activities of your transactions, your users, your IT employees, and so on, together with pattern-based intelligence, which are more checking on correspondent bank, odd hours, timing, and so on, to ensure that banks can focus on strange transaction, red flags, strange behavior, and so on. So that's basically the analytics approach that really fits what we saw earlier. So we really believe that real-time fraud prevention bring way more opportunities beyond the needs of the CSP program. And I will let Pascal summarize these points for the end of the webinar.
Okay, so I'm going to try to summarize a bit of what we said, and also where we think that what could be a takeaway from what we said. So the first, I think that we have basically three big takeaways. First one is remember the spirit of the CSP. I mean, CSP is a checklist, but the checklist it's not just about checking the box. That's a baseline, but you always have to remember that the threat is evolving. As we have seen last week, as we will see in the future, the threat is going to continue to evolve. So you need a solution, and there is an opportunity to really implement changes in process and in tools that are both responding to what we have today and that can evolve with the threat. The second thing is that, as we said, there are two ways to tackle CSP. The first one is to say, okay, we need to implement this checklist, and we want to make sure that we do that before the end of the year. And that's certainly innovative because, as I said, the agenda is relatively aggressive. But still, this can be an opportunity to think a bit wide, because of course you need to first tackle the SWIFT CSP because you want to keep confidence of the community. You want to keep the confidence of your correspondents. That's extremely important in order to operate. But then again, if you think a bit larger and say, okay, yeah, the CSP and SWIFT is part of cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is definitely, and David said that again, definitely on the agenda of all banks' strategies today. Because it's a very important element that has been really increasing a lot in the last years. That even on a broader scale, fraud, well, there is an opportunity to use CSP and cybersecurity to rethink the risk and fraud strategy, the policies and the processes. Because, as Adrian said, we are in an environment of low opportunities for banks, where reducing operational costs is also important. So, leveraging new solutions not based anymore on statistics, batch, human maintenance, producing a lot of alerts and having a lot of operational costs, but switching to more modern tools based on specific profiling, but also that tackles all these elements in real time. And that use machine learning feedback loops in order to improve, and therefore being able to tackle not only the current threat, but also the evolving threats in the future is really an important element. So, as a summary, we have to really tackle the CSPs today before the end of the year, but let's put that in a broader perspective, and we can make it there. From a challenge, we can make it an opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you all for these insightful explanations. Of course, it's a big topic, SWIFT CSP and also cyber fraud is a big topic. So today we could cover a portion of it. And we have some questions now that we can take. And first of all, there's a very good question because we have talked about the timelines, which are very soon actually. Pascal, you have explained that the self-assessment already starts in June. They're opening. So how actually banks can get ready for the CSP by the end of the year? So because it's a very tight deadline, what do you think they can have as recommendations to get ready by the deadline actually?
I think it's more a question for Evelyn, because I think that the banks would need help definitely on that, because and it very much depends on their level of readiness. Because not all banks will be the same level of readiness, but definitely I think that they will help. We need help in terms of assessment and in terms of food.
Adrian, you want to add something maybe on the timeline for the CSP?
I think the difficulty usually is that the implementation timeline, looking into an analysis, and obviously then really considering mitigation measures are very difficult, because many of the institutions have so to say release cycles or implementation cycles, and I think the starting point would, as usual with such initiatives, be with an assessment, and then depending on outcomes, you would introduce measures. So acknowledging obviously that time is very short, and obviously it's just one among many other strategic initiatives financial services institutions have.
Okay, thank you.
And in terms of technology, do you think the deadline is realistic? So how they can really get the right technology on board?
I really think on that side that, as Adrian mentioned, technology is a good point, but aligning it to the need is very key. So people having some already cyber fraud initiative, I would say, are a step ahead, because basically it's the same basket. It's a little bit more specific control, but that's the same basket. And it comes to a question we saw from the panelists around leveraging CSP control around cyber fraud. Also, do not hesitate to post questions on the Q&A panel on the WebEx. We can see them and then take one or two questions till during the talk. But yeah, leveraging technology is a very good question, and I really think that all these controls then that are coming maybe from more from the consulting side of looking at what gaps every bank needs to cover to comply with that, is a great opportunity to leverage platforms that support control digitalization and that support cyber fraud detection through anomaly detection, through behavioral analytics, and so on. And to give an example, banks who are maybe already using such a technology to audit and do some behavioral analytics from IT users or from database administrators, then can also leverage these type of platform to move on the CSP. And on the other side, people who are starting such an initiative then can start from the CSP side and then really move into either more IT risk coverage through behavioral analytics or financial risk coverage, such as maybe e-banking fraud risks that are related to end user behavior and not anymore, I would say, employee behavior. But then big data and analytics platform for cyber fraud then have a broader scope than CSP. So that's the good point about it.
Thank you, Joël. And we have another interesting question. What about, okay, we have the program, but what about the consequences of not complying with the CSP program? Pascal, could you explain a bit what could be the consequences there?
Yes, so there are no consequences actually documented by SWIFT in the current timeline. Just that it is mandatory to have the concept development by end of the year. That being said, the information is supposed to be posted on SWIFT KYC utility platform that's accessible by the banks. It will probably make its way to the AMA later on. So eventually, I think that the consequences would not come from SWIFT, but the consequences would come from the community and from your correspondents, because the level of confidence that banks would have in each other, in their correspondence, would probably be somewhere at some point linked to the fact that they adhere to the CSP. So it's very clear that this could bring a wave, a new wave of de-risking in the future if some banks are not compliant.
Thank you, Pascal.
I would agree. I mean, I'm not aware of any hard measures take in comparison or contradiction the data protection initiative, which have severe impact, which has to be implemented, or at least a plan available by mid-2018. I mean, this is pretty brutal, and what one could probably also imagine is that you would link these activities around CSP with other ongoing initiatives, yeah. But as I said, I don't see that you would have to, that you have specific fines or penalties in comparison to, for example, the data protection initiative.
Okay. Thank you, Adrian. And we have one more question we can take. What about NetGuardians? Does NetGuardians already have some connectors ready to address the SWIFT CSP that we can connect already to SWIFT?
Yes, exactly. Because connector is a good point for data capture side, and then analytics is the other point. Bad data quality brings valueless controls, and the good thing is that we have connectors, we have controls. Basically, data capture analyzing SWIFT messages is then the basic step to achieve. And then bringing that into a relevant analytics platform to look at behavior of your correspondent bank, to look at behavior of your employee, maybe posting direct SWIFT messages on some SWIFT Alliance platforms and so on, is another key aspect. And I think that's a very relevant point. And basically, that's where NetGuardians together with Xandar and together with Accenture are positioning themselves on supporting this initiative and being able to bring quick win solution around that. So yes, we are covering this aspect already.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we have come to the end of our webinar. I thank you all, Pascal, Adrian, and Joël. So we could take some questions, but of course, if you have any other questions, if you'd like to learn more, so we have our speakers always available for you. So please send your questions to info@netguardians.ch, and then we would be happy to direct you to the right person, to the right expert, and to always help you with your challenges. So this is one of, we use the name as the title of the webinar is SWIFT CSP, Challenge and an Opportunity. Okay, it's a challenge. But of course, we can use it also as an opportunity to address cyber fraud issue. So we are here to help you. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch, connect with us, follow us also on social media and other platforms. So I thank you all for your time, and I wish you a happy day and evening if you're also connecting to us from Asia.